The dispatcher came across the radio. She said that the complainant on the phone had just located a miscarriage of some sort in a box. When we pulled up to the home, there was a truck and a trailer parked there, like a utility trailer, and the garage door was open, and it looked as if the family were just doing spring cleaning. A lot of boxes from the garage were out on the driveway. I made contact with Darren and the family. Darren seemed beside himself, kind of like he didn't know really what to do with what was occurring.
See, we've been cleaning the garage.
Okay. Who lives here?
Us three.
1, 2, 3?
It's a double house. The basement and the upstairs are two different.
My two daughters live here.
Darren told us he was in the process of being released from prison. He had his family there helping him prepare to move home. His parents owned the home, and his sister and brother-in-law lived in the basement prior to going to prison. Darren, his wife Megan, and their daughters lived in the home.
And then I'm got a 48-hour pass, and I have...
Here. We went on. Oh, we couldn't find him. Yeah, he was in a halfway house. And we've been cleaning out the garage.
I'm trying to get, because I've been gone for so long. And
anyway, there was a box over there. It was all wrapped up. And he says, what is this?
I immediately asked where the box in question was at. I just pointed towards the front of the garage. It was a fruit box, like an apple box. It had electrical tape wrapped around the outside of it. There was actually a box and then a bag close to it. Darren said that bag had been removed from the box. I remember looking inside the bag and noticing the double layers of bags.
The garbage bags were also taped, and so when they had opened up the tape to see what was inside these bags, that's where they found a deceased baby.
It was obvious that it was in a stage of decomposition, but it looked like a human child.
Officers looked at the baby and speculated that it could be full term, but they didn't feel comfortable removing it from the bags and really examining it closely.
So we contacted the medical examiner's office, and they sent out an investigator. Bewilderment, shock. I was speechless. How could you fathom something like that? The big obvious question is what is this child doing here? Who's the mother? Where did it come from?
We didn't know what was going on, and when we seen all the policemen there, we just thought someone was hurt. When they told us that they had found a dead baby in the box, we were in so much shock that we just couldn't believe it.
We shut the scene down. It's not every day you find a deceased infant child wrapped in plastic in a box in your garage. So absolutely, we looked at it as suspicious.
It's a very somber mood. We don't know whether it is a homicide or not, but we're going to investigate it as if it were.
We started going through the garage box by box. Try to see if there's anything that would suggest to us why this child was here. The state of the garage was extremely disheveled, very cluttered. There were boxes from floor to ceiling on all three walls. There was a moment where I paused and looked around the garage and thought, there's hundreds of boxes. How are we going to get through all of these in one day?
Darren relayed to the officers that he called Megan, and Megan had told him that it was his baby that she had after he went to prison back in 2006.
Let's start off with, is it your wife or your girlfriend?
I'm still married to her, but...
Okay, so legally, according to law, it's still your wife.
Yes, sir.
Okay, why don't you tell me what her name is?
Megan Huntsman. What happened is when I went to prison, she stuck around for 2 or 3 years, and she took off.
But she is with a boyfriend now.
Where is she?
In West Valley somewhere.
We learned Megan and Darren were married for about 21 years and had several children over the course of their marriage. But Megan and Darren lived in the home together for quite a long time.
She just had her on the phone. She said it wasn't his.
And I just said, what the hell is this? What have you done? I always found something. She goes, oh, you did?
Get them for it.
Don't call the police. Don't call the police. I'm going to get it.
So she said it was yours. Logically, is that true?
I don't know, man. I never knew. Amen.
All the neighborhood was confused. It just seemed like a normal family. They kept to themselves mostly. And most of us couldn't believe, is this happening on our street? When it's such a quiet, peaceful family, it was so shocking to all of us. Poor Darren looked awful. Like, I don't believe what I just found. It just broke my heart.
That is not normal. So Officer Abeg called Megan on the phone and spoke with her.
Are you able to help us understand what's going on here? It was a miscarriage.
It was like 9 years ago when we first left.
And how far into your pregnancy were you?
Like 7 months. It was born, stillborn.
Okay. How soon can you come down here? Our detectives need to ask you some follow-up questions so that we can, rule out any kind of foul play.
Okay, there was no foul play.
Okay, listen to me. I need you to stay at your residence. We're going to have a West Valley City officer come pick you up.
We are trying to be sympathetic to her. But as police officers, we're tasked with investigating a crime. And the reality was that she didn't properly dispose of a body. And so were we looking at desecration of a body? We needed to find all the facts.
Thanks for coming down.
Going into the interview, my goal was to understand why a baby was hidden instead of having called the authorities or gone to a doctor or any of those other options that it seems that any of which would have been a better choice.
Well, you know why we're here, what we're here to talk about. Just start at the beginning and tell me what happened.
Well, we were doing drugs a lot. That's what he was in prison for. I got pregnant right before he left, and I really didn't know because I thought it was just stress and stuff.
He went to prison in 2006?
Yeah.
How far along were you when he
Like
went?
a couple months.
Where did you have the baby?
In the house, in the bathroom.
In the house that you and Darren lived in? Describe to me what happened.
Well, I was having a lot of pain that day. I didn't go to work. My kids were at school. I went in the bathroom and just sat there and then was pushed really hard and came out of the blue and wasn't crying. And I was by myself and I didn't know what to do and I couldn't get it to cry or anything.
Then what happened?
I got scared and I wrapped it up. Not being smart and calling you guys, I was in shock. It was stupid of me to do it.
What do you mean when you say you wrapped it up?
You remember? It was towels and garlic butter or something. I put it in the box.
What would you have done differently, looking back?
Called the cops and told them that I had a baby and that I couldn't get to breathe and have the paramedics and stuff come.
She seemed overwhelmed, and I actually perceived the emotions as genuine. Next, I wanted to understand, did she want this baby to live? Did she make life-saving efforts?
Okay, so you're on the toilet, you have the baby. You said you tried to get it to breathe. What did you do?
Well, I tried just to clean his mouth out and stuff, and I couldn't get a response at all.
Okay.
I couldn't feel a heartbeat or anything.
Okay. So you clean the baby's mouth out, try to get it to breathe, and then what?
I passed out for a little bit. I think I lost a lot of blood. And then I just remember my kids got home from school and I just told them I wasn't feeling them. And then I cleaned myself up and I went and got a box.
And then, as far as you know, unless someone else moved it, The baby's been in the box in the garage since that first year that Darren went to prison. Okay.
We clean that garage every year, so.
Were you worried somebody else would find it when you guys were cleaning the garage?
Yeah.
And so what would you do to make sure that didn't happen?
I just kind of slide it and like sweep around, you know, and then set stuff on it and, you know, so they knew that part was already clean and stuff.
My perception was that this very well may just be a stillbirth and a terrible series of decisions. Her husband's in prison, she's alone, she has this baby at home, she's a single mother of 3, and she saw it as the only way to handle the situation. But at the same time, she wasn't making a lot of eye contact, and I did feel like she was withholding information and not being completely honest with me, and I didn't know why.
I was so scared, you know, I don't know what I was thinking. I have no idea.
Do you remember if the baby was a boy or a girl? So, did anyone else know that you were pregnant?
No, I don't show at all.
Did you tell Darren?
No, I never told
Okay. Had you ever had any stillborn babies prior to that?
Miscarriages.
And on these miscarriages, did they all happen at home?
What happened at home?
Does your family have a history of these problems?
The miscarriages? Yeah. My grandma had a lot. I had an aunt that had a stillborn.
So there is
Yeah.
a lot of this in your family. All right. Is there anything else that you think I should have asked you that I haven't asked you?
No, I don't think so.
Is there anything else that you want me to know?
No.
You know, we really want the right thing for this baby. A proper burial and closure for you and for your family. You know, your husband went to prison, you're raising the kids on your own, and you're overwhelmed, and I can understand that. I mean, Darren just found out that he had another kid that he didn't know about, so.
I totally understand that.
What do you think proper closure looks like? Anything else?
Me going to jail.
Well, it's clear that we think you should go to jail for this, that you recognize you've done something wrong. We haven't made any decisions like that. We're still just trying to put the story together at this point.
I was trying to understand her mindset. So for her to say proper closure is burial and me going to jail, that was the first indicator that her mindset could have been criminal.
I remember there being some sort of form of tape over it, and then as we opened it up, there's heavy padding and packaging, more plastic wrap. As we got deeper into that box, we did ultimately find a second child. I felt angry, and I remember thinking, what in the actual hell is going on?
The manner in which the babies were packaged created some suspicion that this might be more than just a stillborn baby. Concern was she was concealing a guilty conscience, and that's why she went to the extent that she did to conceal those babies and their location.
Yep.
There was a knock at the door, and it was an investigator who asked me to come out of the room. That investigator told me that while conducting the search warrant at the house that they had found a second baby. So when I came back into the room, I took a huge sigh, recognizing that if I showed emotion or judgment, it could shut Megan down. I wanted to ensure that she didn't feel like I was being critical or judgmental.
We have investigators in the house right now. They found a second baby. Will you please tell me about that?
There's more. Hey, I'm sorry. I have hid every one of them, and he had to have known I was pregnant through most of them.
There's others? How many?
I'm not even sure. I was on so many drugs and stuff during it all, I can't even remember.
When?
All through the years.
I didn't think she was telling the truth about not being able to remember, but I continued a softer approach. I had to maintain this relationship of trust and not come across as skeptical.
If it's easier for you to remember, if we want to start after you had your first child, when you had the first miscarriage.
One, right after we moved in, I can't even remember. I remember one I had in the tub. They were all stillborn. Every one of them.
Were they full term?
No, they were without me.
Okay, so how many do you think will we find in the garage?
4.
You moved into the house in 2001.
No.
I'm sorry, that's when his mom said it was built.
We moved in that house in 96.
And so the first baby that was born in the house would have been in 1996, shortly after you moved in?
Yeah.
Okay. The last one was right after you went to prison. Did you put all 4 in the garage?
Yeah.
Did you keep them in the same place in the garage? What did you...
It was covered.
Okay. And so all 4 boxes are in the same place? Okay. Well, I just want to be able to relay to the detectives what they're going to find. And so all 4
yes.
children are in the cabinet in the garage?
Yes.
Okay. Why didn't you call for help?
I'm afraid of people know I'm pregnant.
I mean, this is Utah. It's not common for people to have a lot of kids.
Oh, because I was young. Because I was so young.
Several years later, though, when this happened, I mean, you're not so young.
I know. But like I said, the drugs, they mess with you. Bad.
So you're telling me that because you were on drugs, you weren't making good decisions?
Yeah, exactly.
Does it feel better to tell the truth?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, just a minute.
We had information come into us that there were a total of 4 children in that garage, which we had not found yet. We knew that this was a bigger scale investigation than we initially thought. We had upwards of probably 20 or 30 people at the house, going through every nook and cranny, closet, attic, basement, anywhere you could think of to hide anything. Something like this is not something you want to make a mistake on.
All right, we're almost done. We've talked about a lot. I don't know yet. We haven't made those decisions because we're doing the search warrant still. And because of the seriousness of this, they are also going to obtain a search warrant for your house in West Valley. Is there anything at that house that we need to know about before we go up there?
For me, no. All that's up there is my clothes.
Okay.
Most people that I interrogate have probable cause that they've committed a crime, or I know a lot of the answers. And in this case, I still wasn't certain whether everything she was telling me was true. It was a delicate balance between trying to recognize when she was withholding information and whether that was intentional or a result of drug use, of passage of time, possibly mental illnesses.
So you have the babies been in the garage the whole time?
I never moved them or anything. But yeah, they've been in the garage the whole time.
So we're talking 8 years ago.
Yes.
I mean, you told me earlier that you put the boxes with the babies in them in the cabinet.
Yeah.
Did you ever take them out of that cabinet?
No.
I imagine in the last 9 years, stuff's been in and out of the cabinet.
I didn't think so because I was just there a month or so ago getting my bed and stuff out of there, and I seen it sitting there.
Right. And so did anyone in the world know that The baby was in the garage. Okay.
So,
Well, they're saying one of the boxes was on a stack of shelves next to the cabinet. Why would it be there?
unless I moved it or something, but it's not thinking.
Do you know when that might have been?
Before I left, if I did, I mean, I haven't been in that house. I've only once since I moved out.
At this point, because of the atmosphere in the room or the way that she was talking to me, I suspected they were all miscarriages or that they were all stillborn. I'm now thinking not only has she hidden these babies, but she hid the fact that they were born. That was the first moment that I felt that she may have ended these babies' lives. I do believe that having spent 90 minutes now establishing this trust and information eliciting, I continued that pattern and went for more details.
I want to make sure that there's no more weight on your shoulders. Okay. When you have these babies,
Yes.
you said after they were born and they were blue and you try to get them to breathe, what would you do to try to get them to breathe?
Sometimes I was so scared, I
I don't know, I'm sorry.
Sorry, you like shake them, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Like that.
Did you have like the suction cup they used to clean out their mouths?
No, I just use my finger and stuff.
You described you had the one in the tub, that you'd filled the tub and had.
Yeah, I can't. Yeah.
Was that baby alive when it was born?
I think it was. For a short time.
What happened?
Well, you'd think if I had a baby in the house, it just cried, so it would hit,
Mm-hmm. Well, you say you think it was for a short time. What was it moving? Did it start to breathe?
No, it wasn't breathing. I could see a little heartbeat and then it stopped.
Okay. For about how long?
Not very long at all.
Okay.
It didn't make sense. There was help available that she didn't reach out to. If she wanted these babies to live, any other choice would have been better.
The one that you had when he was in prison, that you were on the toilet, was that one alive when it was born? Okay. Where were the other two born?
One on the bed. And the other in the bathroom.
Okay. The one on the bed when it was born. Do you think it might have been alive for a short time as well?
It might have.
I've never asked somebody if they've killed somebody before. I took a several second pause. I knew that this was a make or break question. And that hesitation was actually me trying to decide if it was the right moment to ask it.
Did you kill the baby after it was born? What we need is the truth.
I did one of them.
Which one?
Can't remember. No, I was just so scared. I was so on drugs so bad I choked it.
How did you choke it?
Yeah.
Do you think all four of these babies were alive when they were born?
I'm pretty sure one of them wasn't.
Okay. And did you choke the others?
Yes, I did.
And you put them in a towel, put them in garbage bags, and then put them in a box and put it in the garage.
Yes.
So one was dead when it was born, and the other three you choked. And why did you choke them?
I don't know. Scared. I was in shock.
Have you ever told anyone this?
No, I've never told a soul.
So when we run DNA tests, will they all be Darren's?
Yes, they will.
Okay. Is there anything else we need to know about?
No.
All right.
I took a break because of the emotions that I was feeling. I was overwhelmed by the fact that a woman did something so unthinkable to her newborn babies. Once I'm out of her sight, my hands went to my knees, and I had to take several breaths to really process, holy she had killed these babies.
This was probably one of the longest days in my career. It was emotionally straining, physically exhausting, and the feeling in the air was dread, but also determination to find out what in the hell actually had happened. Eventually, we found baby number 3. Baby number 3 was packaged a lot more tightly than the others. It was several layers worth of duct tape. Once we got the box open, there was again the plastic vinyl bag, and my heart just sunk. And I thought, dear God, please no, not another one.
I'm told that there is a 5th baby found at the home. Now it's becoming almost exhausting. How many could there be? And what is going on?
Right, Megan, I'm really happy with how far you've come, but I'm concerned that you haven't told me everything. How many do you think there possibly could be?
Honestly, I don't know how many. 4 I can think of, but I don't.
Okay. They are up to 5. And so now that there's 5, are you still only certain that one of them was dead when it was born? And so the other 4 were alive?
There could be more. Like I said, I can't remember a damn thing.
How many do you think there would be?
I'd say 8 or 9.
When they're done searching the garage, they are going to search the rest of the house. Will they find any more?
No.
Okay. So there could be 8 or 9?
Yeah, there could be. But I know there's no more than that. And I know there's none in the house. I mean, you'd smell them if they were in the house.
Right. Did the smell from the garage ever come in the house?
No.
It would just be out in the garage?
People said it was some smell, you know, like in the heat of the summer. We had cats and stuff, and you know, and I think it was always just blamed on that.
They would just leave it open?
Mm-hmm.
And you're saying Darren never knew?
No, what I told you, only me. I've kept this to myself for 18 years.
So I'm the only person that you've ever told?
Yes.
As I was talking to Megan, I'm starting to wonder, okay, well, how much Darren knew? I was aware that they didn't have a chance to get their story straight. And so I was interested in what she did feel that his knowledge and or culpability may or may not be.
When I talked to you earlier, you mentioned that Darren should have known. What do you mean by that? Did you tell her?
No. I don't know why. I think my mind was just so out of it. You know, I didn't even, all I focused on was the next fix. But how can you not know? How can you sleep with someone every night and not know that?
When we're talking about Darren knowing that you were pregnant because he's in your bed, those are miscarriages. And so did you just tell him that you miscarried?
Yeah.
Okay. And so when you told him that it was a miscarriage, he never asked what you did with the miscarriage? Okay.
I didn't believe that Darren just happened to find this baby and had no other knowledge of how or where it could have come from. I'm under the suspicion that he knew more than even what Megan knew he knew.
It was hard to grasp and to fathom. I just remembered just being in shock that she kept finding babies, 6 and then finally 7, and it was horrific.
Total of 7 children had been found in the garage. We went to every exhaustive measure trying to determine if there were more than just the 7 children we found. We did a search at her home in West Valley. We used cadaver dogs at multiple locations, and ultimately we didn't find anything more than the 7 found in her garage.
So I have to ask, about the stuff that they're finding. They're up to 7.
Like I said, they're all in the garage.
And you said you were certain that only one was stillborn, and that you strangled the rest.
Yes.
Well, I think I'm ready to take you upstairs then. And we're going to put you in a holding cell while we finish processing the scene. Okay?
Megan was exhausted. She hadn't accepted food or water all day, and we had made our case. So at that point, I do inform her that she's going to jail for murder.
She was only charged with 6 because she maintained that one of the babies was stillborn.
I really wanted to understand how much Darren knew. Was he complicit, and did he tell her to do it? Did he tell her to get rid of him? Or was he so aloof and disconnected that it was convenient that they were gone?
I'm just thinking damn extra much, so I'm trying to talk to everybody and make sure I know that it's been a horrible day for a lot of you. So,
in talking with Darren, I had to be aware of the fact that having the criminal history that he did, if he felt that I was trying to implicate him, that he would immediately request counsel. So I was very careful because I wanted to earn his trust.
You're not in trouble right now. I'm just trying to understand everything that's happened. So she's saying that baby was a miscarriage after he went in prison.
That's what she told me. Is that what she's still saying?
Yes. We did get a search warrant in the house, and there's more than one. And so, how many times was your wife pregnant?
I have 3 daughters, and I know of one other time that she had a miscarriage. I never even knew she was pregnant with 2 of my daughters until she was like 4 or 5 months along. And then she told me, I don't know, sir.
There's...
How many was there?
There was 7.
You are kidding me.
I'm not. She said that the first one was shortly after you moved into the house.
Oh my God.
And that the last one, she was pregnant by you before you went to prison.
Wait, so she says they're all mine?
That's what she says. And that's why I'm glad you're here, because I would have thought that if she was pregnant 7 times in the 10-year period that you lived in that house, that surely you would have known.
Holy
His reaction was very emotional. His head went in his hands, and I actually perceived that as genuine, that he was not aware that there was 7. However, I didn't believe that he just happened to find this baby and had no other knowledge of how or where it could have come from.
You said you knew that she was pregnant once. Are you talking about one other time than the miscarriage, or are you talking about something else?
That's the only time I know. I was so messed up on freaking drugs, and I don't know what was going on.
I can tell that you know about more than what you're telling me. Megan hid pregnancies from everybody until shortly before she had kids. But you're saying that she told you when she was 4 months along. I believe that you knew about these pregnancies.
I swear to God, I never knew about all these pregnancies.
What's happened here is tragic. But I don't think that you killed these babies and hid them. I think that you were married to a woman who was going to do it her way, and then you were done fighting with her, and so you allowed her to make these decisions. Is that what happened?
I never would think that she would put babies in a box and freaking...
So what did you think she was doing with these pregnancies?
I didn't realize she was pregnant 7 freaking times.
I'm a married man. You know your wife's pregnant. And so she's telling me that the only one that you weren't around for is when you went to prison.
Honest to God, I didn't know that there were 7 babies in my garage.
I know.
I never knew there was 1 in there. Do you think I would have go out and clean the garage and then, you know what I mean?
I understand where you're coming from. I'm not saying you knew they were in the garage, but I'm saying you had to know that they were brought into the world. Your wife has admitted to some crimes, to some horrible things. She admits that she killed some of them after they were born. Like I said, she's being completely honest. And I really wish you were too.
What do you want me to say? I didn't know she was killing kids, and I didn't know she was put in boxes. I don't know how they do it. I don't know how she could give birth and then... I don't know.
Were you there when any of these were born?
No, sir. No, sir. I swear.
What we want to do is we want to do what's right. We want to have closure for these children. We want to have closure for your kids that are alive. For these babies' grandparents. I mean, these babies were in a garage for years.
Yeah, I never knew that, no. I never knew that.
As officers, death notifications are very difficult, and this was one that I didn't really view it as a death notification until I had done it. And I actually kind of felt badly that that's how Darren found out that he had fathered 7 other children that he didn't even know about.
I don't want to say nothing else. This is looking bad. I had no idea that she was killing kids and putting them in boxes. I swear to God.
Okay.
But I want an attorney though. Wouldn't you?
I can't give you that advice. I'm not in your situation, and I don't think I ever will be.
No, you won't.
So. Okay. All right, hold on just a second. We'll get you upstairs in just a minute.
My perspective of Darren at that point was that I truly didn't know how much more he knew. But there was no evidence that Darren helped Megan. Also, considering the fact that if he knew that there were bodies in this garage, he wouldn't be cleaning his garage on a 48-hour pass. So he was released. We sent all of the evidence that would preserve a fingerprint, tape, plastic bags, things from the boxes that may have DNA on it. And the FBI did analyze all of that for us. Every fingerprint that the FBI found was Megan's.
Ultimately, Darren was cleared of any involvement in the case.
Our goal from the beginning of this was to ensure justice for
for these babies.
And tonight, justice for 6 babies killed right after birth by their own mother as she pleads guilty to 6 counts of murder.
And the judge gave her the maximum sentence that could keep her locked up for the rest of her life.
Megan, having admitted to killing all but one, she was sentenced to 6 5-to-lifes to be served consecutively. She's going to prison for the rest of her life.
Megan had a family that she was raising. But on the flip side of that coin, she also had 7 dead children in her garage that she had murdered. I don't know what her motive was. I don't care what her motive was. But the fact of the matter is she did it, and that was unfathomable to me.
Neighbors tonight are in absolute shock.
I mean, I just can't even believe that even Megan would be capable of such a thing.
All of us were so surprised to find out that she had had 7 pregnancies and that none of us knew. That was a shock in itself.
This whole event was very traumatic for our community. Something snapped in her brain. I still haven't come to terms with it.
It was heartbreaking to me because, our church is so based on family. Our belief is families are forever. This is our nice little Pleasant Grove. How could this happen in this community?
At the end of the day, there are things that can never be fully explained in this case.
A few years later, they did have a memorial for the babies. Darren's parents did decide to give all the babies a name, which was great, and I'm glad they done that.
The sun hung low over Phoenix, its rays stretching across the desert horizon like molten gold, melting the day into a simmering haze. Streetlights flickered reluctantly to life as shadows stretched across the quiet neighborhoods, casting elongated forms that seemed almost alive. It was a city that prided itself on movement, on light, on vibrancy, yet beneath its ordinary bustle lay a pulse of something darker. In the distance, the sound of tires on asphalt was sharp and rhythmic, cutting through the evening air, but here, on Baseline Road, the streets seemed to hold their breath, waiting. Waiting for something inevitable, something invisible yet undeniably present. Mark Goudeau walked among them, a man whose face blended seamlessly into the crowd yet carried the weight of untold violence in his eyes. On the surface, he was unremarkable, 46 years old, average build, nondescript clothing that wouldn't attract attention in a coffee shop or a grocery store. But beneath that ordinary exterior hid a predator whose mind worked with a meticulous precision that few could comprehend. To those around him, he was just another resident, another commuter, someone who could nod politely as he passed, someone who could wave at a neighbor and vanish into the maze of streets. But when the sun dipped below the mountains and the ordinary citizens of Phoenix retreated to the supposed safety of their homes, Goudeau's reality began to take shape. The first glimpses of terror were subtle, almost unnoticeable. A car parked too long in the wrong spot, a woman waiting for the bus past sunset, a man making the mistake of taking a shortcut through a dimly lit alley. To most, these were ordinary moments, fleeting and forgettable. To Goudeau, each detail was a thread to be pulled, a step toward something that had been brewing inside him for years, something cold and relentless. He didn't need motive in the way others understood it, his drive was woven into the rhythm of control, dominance, and a hunger that had been honed over decades of minor crimes, calculated risks, and a mind that never ceased to plot. By August of 2005, Phoenix was already feeling the unease that would come to define the city's relationship with Baseline Road. There was talk in small circles, hushed conversations among neighbors who noticed patterns that didn't make sense. A man attacked near a bus stop, a woman assaulted in a convenience store parking lot, a man robbed of cash as he walked home in the evening. Each incident, at first, seemed isolated, random, an unfortunate string of coincidences. But the frequency, the intensity, and the chilling randomness began to form a map that no one wanted to acknowledge, a map that led back to one single man, a man whose presence was never announced, never anticipated, yet whose actions left marks that lingered long after he was gone. The city streets, usually alive with evening chatter and the hum of air conditioning units, now held a tension that could be felt but not easily explained. Parents gripped their children's hands tighter, eye-scanning corners and doorways for shadows that might not exist. Late-night workers found themselves walking with a nervous pace, the distance between them and safety measured in heartbeats. Shops installed extra locks, community watch groups formed with hastily scribbled signs, and even the police began to notice a pattern in the otherwise disparate crimes. They didn't yet know the shape of the monster they were chasing, but instinct whispered that someone was orchestrating these events with careful intent. Guido didn't strike at random. His attacks were opportunistic but orchestrated with the eye of a predator who understood timing, perception, and fear. A woman leaving her shift at a grocery store would feel a presence before she saw him, a shadow at the edge of her vision, a quiet footstep echoing behind her. A man crossing a quiet street at night would sense the wrongness before it happened, the small, almost imperceptible shift in the world's rhythm, and then it would be too late. The assaults were not just physical, they were psychological invasions, an erasure of the sense of safety that every human being relies on. Neighbors later described the sensation of the unknown as almost tactile, as if a hand had brushed over the city, leaving a coldness in its wake. It wasn't just fear, it was a creeping awareness that the very streets one had walked for years could betray you, that every shadow could hide something waiting. And in those shadows, Guido moved like water, fluid and untraceable, leaving no mark beyond the trembling recollections of those who had survived and the irrevocable absence of those who hadn't. The first body was discovered on a scorching morning in the outskirts of the neighborhood. The sun had barely risen, casting long, fractured beams across the asphalt, when a local jogger stumbled upon what she initially thought was a bundle of clothing discarded in haste. Her heart leapt as recognition dawned, the shape was unmistakably human. Panic gripped her throat, her breath caught in sudden constriction, and she fumbled for her cell phone, hands trembling, voice barely coherent as she called for help. Within minutes, police cars swarmed the scene, their lights reflecting off the early morning haze, flashing red and blue across the houses that had once felt so secure. The officers' faces tightened as they assessed the scene, the grim realization that this was not an accident, not a robbery gone wrong, but something far more deliberate, far more sinister. The body told a story of violence, of intimate cruelty, of a man who took not just life but the innocence of everyday safety. Every mark, every bruise, every placement spoke of a calculated approach, a mind engaged in a grotesque choreography where he alone knew the steps. The detective's notes would later describe the meticulous nature of the crime scene, the absence of fingerprints, the careful removal of obvious clues, the psychological imprint left behind as though Guido wanted to challenge those who would pursue him to unravel his pattern, to recognize the artistry in his chaos. As weeks turned into months, the city's pulse quickened with dread. More attacks followed, each one heightening the collective anxiety. Windows were left shuttered, doors bolted in the late afternoon, and the streets emptied sooner than they had in years. Guido, moving unseen, seemed almost to taunt the city, a phantom whose presence was felt more than seen, whose reputation grew with each incident. He wasn't violent in the way of spontaneous rage, he was deliberate, cold, and controlled, and that deliberateness made him more terrifying. Families whispered in the dark about the baseline road attacker, trading stories of near misses, shadowy figures at corners, and the quiet terror of waiting for a loved one who might never come home. In coffee shops and grocery stores, eye-scanned strangers with unspoken suspicion, a social fabric fraying under the weight of invisible menace. And yet, Guido blended into the background, mundane in appearance but extraordinary in his capacity for cruelty. He was an unassuming man whose ordinary life masked a reality too horrific to imagine, a man whose attacks were as random as they were precise, leaving the city reeling in confusion and fear. The city's law enforcement, initially treating each incident as a disconnected event, soon recognized a pattern, a shadow linking the crimes. Each assault, each murder, each robbery was a piece of a larger puzzle, a puzzle orchestrated by a mind both banal in appearance and terrifyingly meticulous in execution. Surveillance footage, witness accounts, and forensic evidence slowly began to converge, hinting at a singular force moving through Phoenix with intent and impunity. And yet, every time they thought they were closing in, Guido shifted, moving like a ghost, exploiting the smallest gaps in observation, leaving the police frustrated and the public terrorized. By the time the city had begun to understand the scope of his actions, Guido had already cemented himself in the collective consciousness as a symbol of fear. He was no longer merely a man, he was an idea, a warning of how ordinary streets and everyday routines could harbor unimaginable danger. The baseline killer, as the media would dub him, was both invisible and omnipresent, a contradiction that heightened the terror he inflicted. To those who survived his attacks, to those who lost loved ones, to the city itself, Gudo represented a fracture in the perception of safety, a stark reminder that evil often hides behind the ordinary. Even before his capture, the story of Mark Gudo began to spread beyond Phoenix, a chilling narrative of randomness and method, of violence wrapped in the mundane. He became a cautionary tale, a figure who demonstrated that danger does not always announce itself, that predators can move silently among the unsuspecting, and that fear can seep into every corner of daily life, transforming the familiar into a landscape of dread. The streets of Phoenix, once taken for granted, were now etched with vigilance and suspicion, the very air tinged with anxiety. And so, the stage was set, the city poised on the edge of a nightmare that seemed endless. Every evening brought uncertainty, every shadow a potential threat, every step a negotiation with the unknown. The baseline killer moved unseen, but his presence was etched into the consciousness of Phoenix. His story, one of meticulous cruelty, random violence, and psychological domination, was just beginning to unfold, promising a trail of terror that would leave scars far deeper than the wounds inflicted on the bodies of his victims. As the sun finally disappeared behind the distant mountains, casting the city into a premature twilight, the streets grew quiet, not with peace, but with anticipation. Somewhere along Baseline Road, an ordinary man was preparing for another night, another attack, another act that would stretch the limits of fear and test the resolve of a city unwillingly bound to his shadow. The night belonged to him, but the city would not surrender its story, and the hunt, though long and arduous, had only just begun. Phoenix sprawled under the relentless sun like a city built of light and dust. From the horizon, the jagged silhouettes of the mountains sliced the sky, casting long shadows across a landscape that seemed both vast and intimate, empty yet crowded. Streets glimmered in heat waves, asphalt radiating the day's exhaustion back into the air. Baseline Road cut through this expanse like a scar, an artery carrying the lifeblood of commuters, children on their way home from school, and the occasional traveler who might only pass through once and never return. To the casual observer, it was a patchwork of neighborhoods, quiet cul-de-sacs bordered by shopping plazas, the occasional strip mall offering coffee and snacks, and single-story homes where families tried to live in peace despite the city's restless energy. The heat was a constant, tangible presence. Even as evening approached, the air still shimmered, pressing against skin and clothes like an invisible weight. In the summer of 2005, Phoenix was at its most unforgiving. Thermometers soared past 110 degrees Fahrenheit, and residents were familiar with the oppressive rhythm of dry heat, the way it made the mundane unbearable, the way it stretched every sound into a soft, vibrating hum. Cars slowed along Baseline, their engines hissing, tires squealing over asphalt softened by the sun. The hum of air conditioners became a near-constant white noise, a mechanical heartbeat in a city that rarely slept. People moved faster than usual, limbs sticky with sweat, eyes squinting against the glare, unaware that in these streets, a predator had already begun to map their routines. Baseline Road itself was a contradiction. By day, it seemed ordinary, a commuter's artery, lined with convenient stores, laundromats, gas stations, and the occasional small park where children kicked soccer balls. By night, the ordinary transformed. Streetlights flickered unevenly, pools of light punctuating areas of darkness where shadows crept in like liquid. Alleys and side streets offered cover, spaces where movement could go unnoticed, where intentions could remain hidden. To someone like Mark Gudo, these ordinary details became tools, instruments in a symphony of chaos he orchestrated silently. Every corner held potential, every shadow an opportunity. The city's neighborhoods were similarly diverse, each carrying its own rhythm and character. To the north, older residential areas bore the wear of decades, houses with chipped paint and chain-link fences telling stories of long-term habitation and slow decline. Here, children played in yards under the watchful eyes of grandparents, unaware of the undercurrent of danger that would soon permeate their community. To the south, newer developments offered wide streets, manicured lawns, and cul-de-sacs where families hoped that suburban order equaled safety. Yet even here, the absence of street activity at night created spaces where fear could flourish, spaces that Gudo would exploit with meticulous timing. The city's social tapestry added another layer to the setting. Phoenix was a place of intersections, cultural, economic, and human. Immigrant communities lived alongside established residents, blue-collar workers commuted past high-rise office buildings, teenagers navigated school buses and part-time jobs. In this complexity, a predator could blend, slipping unnoticed among the ebb and flow of daily life. Gudo did not rely on brute force alone, he relied on invisibility, on the assumption that people rarely examined strangers in detail until it was too late. The casual nod of a driver, the brief glance of a pedestrian, the routine of a jogger or a woman walking her dog, all became part of the landscape he studied. Summer nights in Phoenix were a sensory overload. The air smelled of dry earth and asphalt, mingled with the occasional waft of food from late-night diners. Cicadas droned persistently, their song swelling in volume as darkness fell. The city was alive with distant sirens, barking dogs, and the faint clatter of dishes from homes where dinner had just ended. Windows were thrown open against the heat, fans whirring lazily, letting in sounds that would, in a more innocent time, be comforting. But in 2005, those sounds became the backdrop for tension. Each creak of a floorboard, each rustle of leaves, each soft footstep on pavement became a note in an unseen composition of fear, orchestrated by a man whose mind moved in tandem with the city's rhythm yet existed entirely apart from it. Baseline Road was also a corridor of routine and predictability, and therein lay its danger. Commuters followed familiar patterns, children left for school at the same time, buses arrived at the same stops daily, employees crossed intersections with habitual timing. To a casual observer, this predictability seemed comforting. To Gudo, it was a map. Every routine offered him data, information about potential victims, windows of opportunity, and escape routes. He observed from the shadows, sometimes for hours, noting details invisible to those living in them, which doors were left unlocked, which sidewalks were less trafficked at night, which streetlights flickered. These observations were not random, they were calculated steps in a methodical process that blurred the line between preparation and obsession. Phoenix, in this period, was not immune to violence, but the nature of these attacks introduced a new dimension. Randomness, a sense that danger could strike anywhere, undermined the city's assumed order. A woman walking home from work could find herself targeted in a parking lot, a man jogging in the early morning could be ambushed at an intersection. There was no profile to follow, no geographic consistency, no predictable pattern. Fear became a living, breathing entity, moving alongside residents, shaping behavior, dictating choices. Parents restricted their children's movements, neighbors left porch lights burning all night, and friends altered plans out of instinctive caution. The city's pulse, once steady and familiar, became irregular, strained by anxiety and the shadow of a man who understood how to make the ordinary feel treacherous. Police patrols increased, yet even law enforcement struggled to understand the scope. Each attack carried its own unique signature, some involved robbery, others sexual assault, some ended in death, others with miraculous survival. These variations complicated the investigation and made it nearly impossible to link incidents without painstaking work. Surveillance cameras dotted some intersections, but not all. Witnesses were rare, their recollections fragmented and often inconsistent. Gudo's ability to shift locations, to change his methods, meant that even as detectives began to see threads, the tapestry remained incomplete. The residents of Phoenix began to internalize the threat, integrating it into the fabric of daily life. Mothers whispered warnings to their daughters about walking alone, neighbors exchanged wary glances when strangers passed through familiar streets, and the community watch signs, once mere suggestions, became urgent imperatives. Social dynamics changed imperceptibly, conversations carried an edge, interactions were punctuated by suspicion, and trust, always fragile, eroded under the pressure of unseen terror. Gudo's presence, though invisible, imposed itself on the city, dictating behavior and perception. Even businesses along Baseline Road felt the change. Shopkeepers locked doors earlier than usual, employees hesitated to walk to parking lots alone, and deliveries were staggered to avoid evening hours. Public spaces became zones of heightened awareness, the ordinary act of going to a corner store or mailing a package was now infused with an undercurrent of anxiety. Each footstep carried potential, each glance carried caution. In this way, the setting itself, Phoenix, Baseline Road, the surrounding neighborhoods, was not just a backdrop but a character in the unfolding narrative, shaped, bent, and influenced by the presence of a man who moved within its shadows. Goudeau's own environment was equally ordinary, blending seamlessly into the suburban and urban sprawl. His home, vehicles, and routines were unremarkable, offering no hint of the violence contained within his mind. Friends, acquaintances, and casual observers had no reason to suspect that beneath the surface of this unassuming life was a compulsion so calculated, so methodical, and so terrifying. This duality, the banality of his existence juxtaposed with the extremity of his actions, enhanced the terror, making the idea of safety in everyday life feel increasingly illusory. The desert itself contributed to the sense of isolation and vulnerability. Phoenix's sprawling landscape created pockets where one could disappear almost entirely, where streets gave way to alleys, empty lots, and back roads. Goudeau exploited these spaces, using the city's very geography as an ally. Escape routes were planned with precision, vantage points for observation were chosen with care. The terrain, which offered both opportunity and concealment, became an integral part of his methodology. As night fell, the setting transformed yet again. The oppressive heat of the day gave way to a dry chill, and the familiar streets were washed in muted tones of amber from street lamps and distant neon from storefronts. Shadows lengthened, darkness settled unevenly, and the city exhaled a collective tension that was palpable to anyone attuned to it. Within this shifting environment, Goudeau operated with deliberate patience, a conductor of chaos who understood the rhythms of the city, the predictability of its inhabitants, and the weaknesses in its defenses. By the end of the first months of his attacks, Phoenix had internalized a new reality. Baseline Road, once just a route from point A to point B, was now a corridor of uncertainty, a place where vigilance replaced routine, where fear reshaped community interactions, and where the ordinary had become extraordinary in its capacity to harbor danger. Every detail, the cracked pavement, the flickering light, the empty parking lot, the distant hum of traffic, contributed to the narrative of terror. The city itself had become part of the story, a landscape in which fear was both protagonist and antagonist, shaped by the presence of a single man whose ordinary exterior belied the extraordinary horror he was capable of inflicting. The first time you encounter someone in passing, you never truly know the weight of their presence, the rhythm of their days, or the small patterns that define their existence. For the victims of Marc Goudeau, life before that fateful encounter was often ordinary, seemingly mundane, yet brimming with hope, routines, and the quiet struggles of human existence. Each of them moved through Phoenix with familiar steps, unaware that a shadow had begun to track them with unerring precision. Their lives, vibrant and full, were about to be shattered in ways that would leave permanent scars on the city and its consciousness. Take, for instance, Lorna Martin, a 56-year-old woman whose laughter filled the small office where she worked as a bookkeeper. Her mornings began before sunrise, with a cup of coffee brewed strong, the aroma filling her modest apartment as she read the local newspaper. She walked the same route to the bus stop every day, nodding to neighbors, greeting the barista who prepared her coffee, carrying a sense of quiet routine that gave rhythm to her life. Lorna's days were ordinary in the best sense, predictable, stable, comforting. And yet, it was that very predictability that made her a target. On an August evening in 2005, as the sun dipped behind the mountains and shadows stretched across Baseline Road, she was approached by a man whose presence seemed innocuous at first. A few seconds later, those seconds that could have passed unnoticed became a lifetime of horror that would leave her forever changed. Then there was Andre Brown, a man in his early 30s who had recently returned to Phoenix after a stint working construction out of state. He had a small apartment near a bus depot, a place that buzzed with commuters and the occasional late-night reveler. Andre had a routine: leave for work at dawn, sometimes jog along a side street to clear his mind, return home in the evening, and cook a simple dinner while catching glimpses of the news. He loved baseball and often spent weekends coaching local kids, imparting lessons that extended far beyond the diamond. Andre never expected that on a late evening, as he returned from a day of labor, he would encounter a stranger whose calm, ordinary demeanor masked lethal intent. That encounter left scars, not just physical, but psychological, a tremor that would ripple through his sense of security, altering the way he walked the streets, the way he trusted the world around him. Some victims were younger, in the midst of discovering independence and identity. A woman named Cindy Yancey, only 35, had moved to Phoenix to pursue a career in real estate. She carried ambition in her stride, optimism in her smile, and a meticulous attention to detail that made her a rising star in her office. Cindy had her own rituals, morning jogs before heading to showings, evenings spent reviewing contracts and planning her day, weekends with friends exploring the city's cafes and parks. Her life was full of potential, the kind that seems to stretch endlessly before you until it is abruptly truncated. One night, leaving a client meeting, she walked along a dimly lit street near Baseline, oblivious to the man who had observed her from the shadows for days, noting her habits, her pace, her vulnerabilities. What followed would leave a permanent mark on the community's perception of safety, showing how quickly ordinary life could be transformed into terror. Each victim had routines, habits, and vulnerabilities that were entirely human, entirely understandable, yet entirely exploitable. Gudo observed them with the patience of a predator who understood that terror is not created in moments of chaos alone, but in the careful selection of opportunity. He watched the way someone paused to adjust a backpack strap, the way a commuter waited for the bus with a phone pressed to an ear, the way a person glanced at a streetlight that flickered inconsistently. These small details, insignificant to the casual observer, became critical pieces of information that allowed him to strike with precision. What tied the victims together was not their age, their gender, or even their occupation. It was the randomness of their selection, the arbitrariness of the violence that would befall them. Some were taken from parking lots, others from sidewalks, a few from the supposed safety of their homes. To the survivors and the families of the deceased, the question was never why this person, why this moment, why here. There was no logic in Gudo's choices, only the chilling reality that danger could touch anyone, anywhere, at any time. That universality of vulnerability amplified the terror for the entire city, and it is why the victims' stories resonate not just as isolated tragedies, but as a collective narrative of fear and resilience. Consider the case of Dana Taylor, a mother of two who worked part-time at a local grocery store. Her life was filled with the quiet demands of caretaking, school lunches prepared, homework monitored, bedtime routines enforced. Dana's evenings, though repetitive, were her sanctuary, a space where she could breathe after a day of labor and responsibility. But even sanctuaries can be violated. On a hot September evening, as she stepped out to take the trash to the curb, Gudo was there, waiting silently. The encounter was swift, shocking in its suddenness, and it left a mark not just on Dana's body but on her sense of place in the world. Her home, once a fortress of security, now became a site of fear, and her children's innocent questions about why their mother seemed withdrawn and anxious reflected a new reality imposed by someone else's malice. Some victims never survived the encounter. Their stories exist in photographs, in memory, in the echo of routines abruptly ended. Families left with grief so raw it seemed to throb in the air, neighbors with the lingering knowledge that someone so ordinary could harbor such extraordinary capacity for evil. Each death was a puncture in the city's sense of normalcy, a reminder that life, as it is lived in everyday detail, can be upended in an instant. The names, Lorna, Andre, Cindy, Dana, became more than identifiers, they became symbols of ordinary humanity confronted by incomprehensible violence. The impact extended beyond immediate families and friends. Teachers, co-workers, baristas, neighbors, all those who had fleeting interactions with the victims experienced a subtle shift in awareness, a heightened sense of caution that pervaded daily life. A bus driver might slow his gaze at a passenger he had waved at for years. A neighbor might hesitate before opening a door at night. The city's social fabric, delicate and invisible, strained under the weight of collective fear. In this way, the victim's presence continued to influence the narrative even as some were no longer present in body. Their lives, choices, and routines became both a map for the predator and a cautionary tale for the living. Psychologically, the survivors carried a burden that was invisible but immense. Many described an almost obsessive recalibration of their environment, double-checking locks, avoiding poorly lit streets, varying routines to avoid predictability. Anxiety became a constant companion, not as a fleeting reaction to trauma, but as a reshaping of their perception of normalcy. Each victim's story illustrates a critical truth about Goudeau's methodology. The terror was not only in the act of violence but in the lingering, pervasive sense of vulnerability he imposed. Even those untouched directly were drawn into a web of tension, hyper-awareness, and fear, as the city collectively sensed the predator in its midst without fully seeing him. Goudeau's randomness amplified the terror. Unlike serial killers who follow a clear victim profile, his choices were seemingly arbitrary. This randomness forced survivors and the community to confront a disorienting reality: danger did not discriminate. Age, gender, occupation, socio-economic status, none of these factors provided immunity. The unpredictability heightened the psychological weight of the attacks, turning ordinary routines into a constant negotiation with fear. Every morning walk, every bus ride, every trip to the corner store became a gamble. Each victim's life, therefore, was both an isolated tragedy and part of a larger narrative that reshaped the city's collective consciousness. And yet, despite the horror, the victims were human first. They had dreams, quirks, passions, and moments of joy. Andre's laughter coaching young baseball players, Cindy's careful preparation for client meetings, Dana's tender patience with her children, Lorna's quiet humor in the office, these moments were not erased by Goudeau's violence. They remain, in memory and testimony, as vital threads of life that stand in stark contrast to the shadow of death. It is this juxtaposition, the vibrancy of ordinary human life against the cold, calculated disruption of a predator, that forms the emotional core of their stories. By understanding their routines, their choices, their spaces of comfort, one begins to understand both the cruelty and the cunning of Goudeau. His attacks were not random in execution, they were methodical, designed to exploit vulnerabilities while leaving the maximum psychological imprint. Each victim's life, therefore, provides insight into the predator's mind. He studied, observed, and selected moments that would yield both physical and psychological impact. He did not merely seek bodies, he sought disruption, a rewriting of the ordinary into a narrative of terror. In the end, the victim's stories serve as a reminder of what is lost when violence intrudes into the fabric of daily life. They illustrate the fragility of perceived safety, the consequences of unremarkable routines intersecting with a calculated predator, and the profound human cost of a life interrupted. Their lives, though cut short or irrevocably altered, continue to inform our understanding of fear, resilience, and the ways in which communities respond to extraordinary threats. They are, in every sense, central to the narrative, their experiences shaping the city, the investigation, and the collective memory of Phoenix during one of its darkest periods. It began quietly, almost imperceptibly, on nights when the ordinary hum of Phoenix felt like the only constant in the city's rhythm. A lone pedestrian, returning from work or errands, felt a subtle shift in the air before realizing what it meant. There was a presence, a tension, a pause in the usual cadence of footsteps and distant traffic. That pause was often the only warning before Marc Goudeau struck. His attacks were not chaotic, they were surgical, almost rehearsed, executed with a precision that transformed seconds into a nightmare that would stretch indefinitely in the minds of his victims. One evening, Lorna Martin stepped off the bus at the usual stop near Baseline Road. The air was thick, humid even in the desert heat, carrying the scent of asphalt warmed by the day's sun. She clutched her bag, her eye scanning the streetlights as if aware of the growing shadows that clung to the edges of the sidewalks. The city felt calm, almost ordinary, but the calm was deceptive. Goudeau had observed her for days, noting her habits, the time she caught the bus, the way she hesitated for a moment before crossing the street, the brief glance she gave the corner store window. That knowledge gave him leverage, an invisible map of opportunity that no one else could see. He emerged from the shadows with the quiet inevitability of a predator closing in. There was no dramatic pause, no audible warning. A glance, a step, and the world shifted. Lorna felt a brush of air behind her, the subtle pressure of another presence. Her body tensed instinctively, heart accelerating in the rhythm of fear before her conscious mind could process the threat. Then, without hesitation, Goudeau moved. He grabbed, restrained, controlled, his hands firm, deliberate, leaving no room for struggle before he imposed his will. The attack was fast, mechanical in its precision, yet filled with an intimacy of violence that made it uniquely terrifying. Simultaneously, blocks away, another incident unfolded. Andre Brown was walking home after a long day of construction, his body still buzzing from exertion. The streets were quieter than usual, the desert heat cooling just enough to make the shadows seem to stretch and bend. He passed an alley, unaware that a figure had observed him, had mapped his stride and pace, and had chosen this exact moment. The initial contact was sudden, a hand on his shoulder, a whisper in his ear, enough to freeze him before understanding the full scope of danger. Goudeau's approach was calm, almost casual, masking the lethal intent beneath an ordinary demeanor. Andre's instinct screamed, but by the time the fight-or-flight response surged, the attack had begun, precise and unyielding. Cindy Yance's encounter was slightly different, yet equally terrifying. She had just left a client meeting, her heels clicking on the pavement, the soft glow of street lamps illuminating the sidewalk. The night felt ordinary, safe even, until she noticed him, a man lingering by the curb, posture casual, eyes scanning as though waiting for someone or nothing. Cindy paused for a brief second, a flicker of unease registering before rational thought dismissed it. That split second became everything. Goudeau closed the distance in a stride, hands moving quickly, and she was trapped in an invisible grip of control. The attack was executed with a chilling efficiency, a precise orchestration of fear, pain, and dominance that left Cindy physically scarred and emotionally destabilized. Dana Taylor's encounter at her home was the most intimate of the incidents, yet no less horrifying. The evening had descended into the dry chill of Phoenix night. Her children were inside, homework sprawled across the kitchen table, laughter echoing faintly from the living room. Dana stepped out to take the trash to the curb, an ordinary act in an ordinary life. But Goudeau had observed her movements, noted the timings, and understood the patterns of domestic life that offered both opportunity and vulnerability. He approached silently, every movement deliberate, his presence almost undetectable until it was too late. The attack unfolded in moments but left repercussions that stretched far beyond the immediate incident, a mother's sense of sanctuary violated, children witnessing the aftermath of trauma, and a home forever altered by the intrusion of violence. The common thread in all these incidents was the combination of randomness and meticulous planning. Goudeau's attacks were unrelenting, yet they carried a disturbing rhythm, a cadence that suggested observation, calculation, and patience. He did not rely solely on brute strength, he relied on timing, on the exploitation of routine, on the psychological manipulation of fear. Each encounter was designed not only to cause physical harm but to imprint an indelible sense of vulnerability on the victim. The terror lingered long after the attack ended, echoing through their routines, their habits, their perceptions of safety. Witnesses later recounted the surreal nature of these moments. For survivors, the attacks often felt suspended in time, as though the world had slowed to observe the interaction. A step that once seemed ordinary became a trap, a glance at the corner of the street became an opening for violence. Some described the suddenness as dizzying, the hands, the grip, the push, the struggle, yet interspersed with a disorienting calm, a sense that the attacker was completely in control, the world bending to his will. Goudeau's methodology amplified the terror beyond the immediate moment. In some cases, he would leave traces, subtle marks of presence that were enough to unnerve but not enough to immediately identify him. He understood that fear was as much psychological as it was physical. A victim might survive with minor injuries but carry an acute awareness of every shadow and flicker of movement for years. Those who did not survive left a void in their communities, a sudden absence that punctuated the city's consciousness with grief and apprehension. The attacks were also notable for their unpredictability in location and timing. He struck during the day and at night, in public spaces and semi-private ones. He disrupted the ordinary assumption that daylight equaled safety. A bus stop at 3 p.m. could be as lethal as a dimly lit alley at midnight. This unpredictability heightened the sense of pervasive fear within the city. Parents no longer allowed children to walk the same routes to school. Adults altered routines, sometimes irrationally, attempting to escape a threat that could not be anticipated. Every incident created ripples, forcing the community to confront the uncomfortable truth: the danger was everywhere, invisible, and unrelenting. Physical violence was only one element of Goudeau's terror. The psychological imprint was equally deliberate. Victims described the uncanny nature of his presence, the way he seemed to anticipate movement, the cold calculation in his actions. It was not just a struggle for survival, it was a lesson in vulnerability, a stark demonstration of how the ordinary could be weaponized. Survivors would later recount recurring nightmares, hypervigilance, and an altered perception of public spaces. Each attack was a narrative, crafted to impose a lasting sense of instability, and the victims became unwilling participants in a story that had no apparent logic or end. Even in the aftermath of each attack, the city itself bore witness to the incident. Streets, once ordinary, became markers of caution. A parking lot became a site of remembered terror. Baseline Road, with its ordinary intersections and faded street signs, became a corridor of menace. Residents shared stories of encounters that ended in violence or near misses, building a collective consciousness of fear that transcended the individual incidents. Goudeau's presence, though physically elusive, became embedded in the city's psyche. The physical details of the incidents were as chilling as the psychological impact. Bruises, abrasions, and deeper trauma marked the bodies of survivors. Homes and streets bore silent witness, overturned trash cans, scuffed pavements, door frames scratched from struggle. Each mark was both evidence and echo of the predator's intent, a sign that ordinary life had been interrupted by extraordinary malice. And yet, despite the violence, there was an element of invisibility. Goudeau left few traces, relied on the speed and precision of his movements, and exploited the weaknesses inherent in human routine. The randomness extended beyond victim selection. Goudeau's attacks varied in method, intensity, and outcome, creating a climate in which certainty became impossible. Some incidents involved assault and robbery, others escalated to sexual violence, and some culminated in death. The variability prevented patterns from being easily discerned, complicating law enforcement efforts and heightening public anxiety. In the absence of predictability, fear became ubiquitous, a shared condition across neighborhoods and demographics. Each incident was more than a crime, it was a disruption of the ordinary, a fracture in the everyday rhythm of life. Survivors would carry the memory in subtle ways: avoidance of certain streets, hesitation in public spaces, the tightening of routines that once offered freedom. Families mourned, not only the lives directly affected but also the intangible security that had been shattered. The city itself felt the impact, as routines were rewritten, trust eroded, and a pervasive sense of vulnerability took hold. By the time the baseline killer had struck multiple victims across months, the incidents collectively created an invisible map of terror. Each attack reinforced the previous one, leaving a trail not just of physical evidence but of psychological disruption. Communities became hyper-aware, altering behavior and social interactions in response to an unseen threat. Goudeau's methodology, blending randomness with meticulous planning, ensured that the ordinary was never again taken for granted. Every step outside the home, every commute, every interaction carried the potential for danger, and the city's ordinary rhythms were transformed into a continuous negotiation with fear. The morning after an attack, Phoenix seemed ordinary again. The sun rose over Baseline Road, washing the streets in pale light, illuminating cars parked along the sidewalks, small shops opening their doors, and children waiting for the school bus. From a distance, life appeared uninterrupted. Yet beneath this veneer of normalcy, the city carried the invisible weight of what had occurred the night before. The discovery of a crime scene was never just about locating physical evidence, it was about peeling back the layers of ordinary life to reveal the chaos, terror, and destruction left behind by someone like Mark Goudeau. The first responders, police officers, detectives, paramedics, arrived at the scene with practiced efficiency, but even their training could not completely shield them from the shock. A body in a driveway, a woman slumped in the shadow of a streetlight, a man sprawled on the asphalt with bruises and lacerations, each scene carried a jarring mix of familiarity and horror. Streets that had been mundane minutes before now became theaters of violence, marked by the subtle yet unmistakable signature of a predator who thrived in chaos. Officers would pause at the edges of these scenes, absorbing details, the position of the body, the orientation of personal belongings, the faint traces of a struggle. Each observation was catalogued, documented, and photographed, but the emotional resonance lingered, difficult to shake. At Dana Taylor's home, the discovery was particularly intimate and jarring. Paramedics entered the driveway, noting the overturned trash can, the door left ajar, the small scuffs on the siding. Inside, her children clung to each other, eyes wide with confusion, ears ringing with the echo of their mother's screams. The police officers moved carefully, speaking softly yet firmly, attempting to reassure both the children and Dana, whose face was streaked with tears and dust, hands trembling as she tried to articulate the sequence of events. In these moments, the discovery was not just about the physical crime, it was about human vulnerability exposed in its rawest form, and the immediate, visceral impact on those who bore witness. Across the city, Baseline Road became a corridor of fear for those who had not yet encountered Gudo directly. A bus stop where Lorna Martin had been attacked was cordoned off, yellow tape fluttering in the early morning breeze like a stark warning. Residents whispered about what had happened, recounting snippets of information gleaned from neighbors or local news. Store owners paused in doorways, scanning for unusual movement, suddenly hyper-aware of every stranger's glance. The discovery of a crime scene was not an isolated event, it rippled outward, infiltrating the routines of an entire community, rewriting the assumptions of safety, and forcing the population to confront the reality that terror could strike anywhere. Detectives approached each scene methodically, noting the subtleties that might link this incident to previous attacks. A strand of hair on the pavement, a faint smear on a sidewalk, scuff marks near a doorframe, these were not just details, they were breadcrumbs left by a predator who understood both the mechanics of attack and the psychology of fear. Each discovery offered potential clues, but also new questions. How had the perpetrator entered the space? What sequence of movements had allowed him to execute the attack with such precision? Were there signs of planning, or was this purely opportunistic? Investigators would catalogue, analyze, and theorize, knowing that every piece of evidence might bring them closer to a suspect or lead them down a dead end that wasted precious time. In some cases, survivors themselves became the first points of discovery. Andre Brown, after struggling with Gudo, managed to call 911 from a cell phone trembling in his hand, his voice breaking as he described the attack. Officers arrived within minutes, but in those moments, the psychological impact was raw and unfiltered. Paramedics treated visible injuries, while detectives attempted to capture the sequence of events, noting inconsistencies, but aware that trauma itself could distort memory. The discovery of the incident through the eyes of the survivor added an additional layer of complexity to the investigation. It was not just the physical evidence, but the human account that would shape the narrative and influence the path of justice. The city's infrastructure played an unexpected role in documenting the incidents. Security cameras at gas stations, convenience stores, and intersections captured fleeting glimpses of Gudo. Though grainy and often incomplete, these recordings provided critical evidence, transforming ordinary city surveillance into tools of revelation. Investigators spent hours analyzing frame by frame, looking for the slightest indication of identity, the way he walked, a hand gesture, the clothing he favored, the cadence of movement. Each piece of visual evidence was painstakingly compared to witness accounts and physical traces left at the scene, creating a composite picture that slowly began to emerge amidst the chaos. The psychological landscape of discovery extended beyond the immediate crime scene. Neighbors who arrived first, curious or alarmed, often became unwitting witnesses to the aftermath. They described the dissonance of seeing a familiar street, a familiar home, transformed into a tableau of violence. A mail carrier might pause, delivering letters to doors that had recently hosted terror. A jogger might glance at a flickering streetlight and feel a sudden, inexplicable tension, a vestige of the attack's lingering presence. In this way, the act of discovery was not confined to investigators, it was embedded in the community itself, creating a collective awareness of vulnerability that could not be undone. Police protocols dictated systematic procedures, cordoning off the area, photographing every angle, collecting forensic evidence, and documenting statements from witnesses. But even with such rigor, the emotional imprint remained indelible. Officers spoke quietly among themselves, acknowledging the unsettling patterns of violence, aware that the perpetrator was active, mobile, and unpredictable. Each discovery brought renewed urgency, a reminder that time was of the essence, and that the next incident could occur anywhere, at any moment. In some incidents, the discovery revealed Gudo's opportunism in stark terms. Personal belongings, wallets, phones, jewelry, were often taken, but their selection seemed almost incidental compared to the psychological effect of the attack itself. The scenes were arranged not for maximum theft, but for maximum disruption: a backpack left open, papers scattered across a driveway, a door left swinging in the breeze. These subtle manipulations transformed ordinary environments into spaces of terror, ensuring that the memory of the incident would linger long after physical injuries healed. Victims' families often arrived at the scene shortly after police secured the area. Their reactions ranged from disbelief to profound grief, from protective instinct to uncontrollable panic. The emotional intensity was immediate, raw, and difficult to mediate. Investigators had to navigate both the physical evidence and the emotional landscape, understanding that each reaction could influence the clarity of witness statements and the course of subsequent investigation. In this way, discovery was as much about human psychology as it was about forensic science. As the baseline killer continued his attacks, patterns began to emerge, but they were subtle, easily obscured by the randomness of the incidents. Detectives started to recognize consistencies: the way victims were approached, the types of streets chosen, the mixture of public and semi-private locations. Each discovery, each crime scene, added to an evolving map of terror. Yet even as patterns emerged, the unpredictability persisted, reinforcing the pervasive sense of unease. Phoenix itself became a living chronicle of these incidents, with each street, sidewalk, and intersection bearing silent witness to the trauma inflicted by a predator who remained largely unseen. Forensic teams played a crucial role in bridging the gap between discovery and understanding. Every fingerprint, every strand of hair, every trace of DNA was meticulously collected, catalogued, and compared to databases. These physical traces were small, almost imperceptible to the casual observer, but they were threads connecting disparate incidents into a coherent narrative. In some cases, a single drop of blood or a partial print became the key to identifying Gudo, transforming abstract fear into a tangible path toward justice. Beyond the tangible evidence, the discovery phase revealed the broader social impact of Gudo's attacks. Streets emptied earlier, neighborhoods increased patrols, and community watch programs became more vigilant. Ordinary routines were altered, sometimes permanently, as residents internalized the knowledge that danger could strike at any time. The city's collective consciousness shifted, blending ordinary life with heightened alertness, the mundane overlaid with an ever-present tension. Each discovery reinforced the narrative that Gudo's attacks were not isolated, they were deliberate, targeted, and terrifyingly effective. The scenes told stories of both brutality and careful planning, leaving behind not just physical evidence but psychological imprints that would ripple through survivors, families, and the broader community. For the investigators, each scene was a puzzle piece. For the residents, each discovery was a reminder that normalcy was fragile, that ordinary life could be upended in an instant, and that the city they thought they knew was now a landscape of hidden danger. Even as the city tried to resume its routines, the discovery of each attack lingered. Mail carriers noted streetlights where violence had occurred, neighbors exchanged wary glances near familiar intersections, and children's laughter carried a sharper edge, conscious of the shadows where Gudo might lurk. Each crime scene was a point of rupture in the fabric of Phoenix, a disruption that extended far beyond the immediate victims. By the time the investigators had connected multiple incidents along Baseline Road, a chilling narrative emerged: the predator was patient, meticulous, and opportunistic. He understood both human behavior and urban geography, exploiting ordinary patterns to create extraordinary terror. Each discovery, whether through physical evidence, witness statements, or security footage, provided a glimpse into the mind of a man who operated in plain sight yet remained largely invisible. In the end, the act of discovery was never simple. It involved piecing together fragments of physical evidence, interpreting the psychological impact on survivors and witnesses, and understanding the subtle consistencies that linked one attack to the next. For the city of Phoenix, each discovery was a painful reminder that life could be disrupted in an instant, that ordinary routines were never entirely safe, and that the baseline killer was not merely a figure in the shadows, but a tangible force reshaping the everyday lives of everyone in his path. The investigation into the baseline killer began like many others, with fragments of evidence, shaken witnesses, and a city grasping for comprehension. From the outset, it was clear that this was not a typical string of robberies or assaults. Each crime carried a subtle signature, a combination of randomness and methodical execution that suggested a singular intelligence behind the violence, but the lack of a consistent victim profile or clear geographic pattern left investigators scrambling. At first, the police considered the possibility that multiple perpetrators were at work. Each attack had its differences. Some occurred in broad daylight, others at night, some involved robbery, others escalated to sexual assault, some left the victim alive, others claimed their life. In the absence of clear consistency, detectives faced an array of dead ends and false leads. Initial suspects came from the most obvious places: local residents with criminal records, parolees, or individuals with a history of violence. The police interviewed dozens of men who had been previously arrested for assault, sexual crimes, or robbery. Fingerprints were run, alibis checked, and interrogations conducted, but nothing produced a direct link to the crimes. Each suspect offered a temporary sense of hope or relief, only for that hope to dissolve under scrutiny. For weeks, the city of Phoenix was left with a dual fear: the terror of ongoing attacks and the frustration of watching police efforts struggle to identify the perpetrator. One early suspect, a man who frequented the same neighborhoods as several victims, was brought in for questioning after a witness thought they recognized him near a crime scene. Police canvassed the area, collected statements, and conducted background checks. For a tense 48 hours, investigators worked under the assumption that they might have their man. But forensic evidence did not match, alibis held, and he was released. The relief was brief and hollow, for the attacks continued almost immediately afterward, a grim reminder that the real predator was still at large, watching, calculating, and moving through the city undetected. Witness descriptions provided tantalizing clues but also complicating variables. Survivors who had endured Goudeau's attacks were brave enough to give statements, yet trauma can distort memory, and fear can cloud perception. A fleeting detail, a tattoo, a hat, the way someone walked, became a potential lead, yet when followed, often led nowhere. One survivor described a man with a distinctive limp, while another cited a man with broad shoulders and a deep voice. These conflicting accounts made it difficult for investigators to establish a consistent profile, leaving them with pieces of a puzzle that refused to fit together. The variability in Goudeau's methods compounded the difficulty. Some attacks were swift, violent, and opportunistic, others involved careful observation and preparation. In one instance, a victim survived an assault near her apartment complex, providing a description of a man who appeared calm, almost casual, yet entirely in control. In another, a passerby witnessed a robbery that turned violent, describing the assailant as nervous, fidgety, and disorganized. Investigators were left with the unsettling realization that they were not dealing with a single type of offender, they were dealing with someone who could adapt, shift personas, and defy conventional profiling techniques. Detectives turned to behavioral analysis, working with profilers who attempted to create a psychological map of the killer. They considered the possibility of a serial offender, noting the calculated nature of the attacks, the willingness to escalate to lethal force, and the ability to operate in both public and semi-private spaces without being detected. Yet even the profilers faced challenges: the randomness of the victim selection and the lack of a consistent geographic or demographic pattern meant that the baseline killer could not be easily classified. The profile was broad, outlining general tendencies rather than specifics: a middle-aged male with prior criminal experience, capable of premeditation, opportunistic, and willing to escalate violence. It was guidance, not certainty, and in a city of hundreds of thousands, certainty was desperately needed. Dead ends emerged in unexpected ways. A series of anonymous tips flooded the police department, ranging from plausible leads to wild conjectures. Some claimed to know the killer, others insisted the crimes were the work of gangs or multiple individuals. Each tip consumed time, energy, and resources, and yet the real culprit remained elusive. Police officers often returned to the same neighborhoods repeatedly, canvassing the same streets, interviewing the same residents, hoping for a spark of recognition, a breakthrough in the fog of fear. Each dead end added to the collective tension, both for the investigators and the residents of Phoenix, who lived under the growing shadow of uncertainty. One particularly frustrating lead involved a man previously convicted of sexual assault who lived near a cluster of attacks. Surveillance and interviews were conducted, fingerprints checked, and alibis scrutinized. For a tense week, investigators considered the possibility that the baseline killer had been apprehended in all but name. But forensic evidence and further analysis disproved the connection, and he was released. The disappointment was palpable. Officers had imagined closure, yet the attacks continued unabated. With each failed lead, the psychological toll on both law enforcement and the public intensified. Phoenix had entered a period where every shadow, every stranger, every routine activity carried the potential for threat, and no one had answers. Community response played a role in both complicating and aiding the investigation. Residents began sharing information, canvassing neighborhoods, and reporting suspicious activity. Tips flowed in constantly, but not all were reliable. Some were based on fear and misperception rather than fact, sending investigators down false paths. Neighbors pointed to unfamiliar men or cars, sometimes accurately, often mistakenly. Each new lead required meticulous vetting. The sheer volume of information made the investigation a delicate balancing act, weighing urgency against accuracy, instinct against evidence. Even within the police department, tension grew. Detectives faced pressure from city officials, media scrutiny, and an increasingly anxious public. The narrative of a random, ruthless killer dominating the streets created an atmosphere of both urgency and frustration. Investigators worked long hours, often following up on leads that ultimately led nowhere, their own morale tested by the repeated failures. Each crime scene became a reminder of what they had yet to prevent, each dead end a mirror of the city's collective fear. Despite the obstacles, the investigation slowly coalesced. Patterns began to emerge when detectives noticed subtle consistencies. The attacks clustered around certain streets, victims shared behaviors that suggested observability, and the perpetrator left traces, however faint, that could be pieced together. Survivors' testimonies became more critical, and the integration of forensic science and behavioral profiling provided a framework for narrowing the search. Investigators realized that the killer was methodical, patient, and adaptive, a man who observed, waited, and exploited vulnerabilities in ways that conventional policing had not fully anticipated. Goudeau's ability to evade detection was partly due to the randomness of his attacks, but also due to his understanding of human perception. He varied his approach, sometimes striking swiftly and brutally, other times approaching in a casual, almost benign manner. He understood how to blend into ordinary surroundings, how to exploit assumptions of safety, and how to leave minimal traces. Investigators, initially overwhelmed by the disparate nature of his crimes, began to appreciate the sophistication behind what appeared at first to be random violence. The dead ends, false leads, and conflicting witness accounts ultimately shaped the investigative strategy. Detectives learned that piecing together the baseline killer's actions required patience, attention to detail, and the ability to see connections that were not immediately obvious. The process involved revisiting previous crime scenes, re-interviewing witnesses, and reanalyzing forensic evidence with fresh eyes. It was meticulous, exhausting, and often disheartening work, but it laid the foundation for the breakthroughs that would eventually lead to Goudeau's capture. The narrative of Suspects and Dead Ends is more than just a chronicle of investigative challenges. It reflects the human costs of uncertainty, the anxiety, fear, and frustration experienced by survivors, families, law enforcement, and the city as a whole. Every failed lead, every mistaken identity, every misinterpreted clue added to the sense that the baseline killer was not just a criminal, but a force that reshaped daily life, disrupted routines, and instilled a pervasive psychological tension that would linger long after the attacks. By the time investigators began to focus on Mark Goudeau, the groundwork laid by months of dead ends, witness interviews, and painstaking analysis allowed them to recognize the subtle consistencies in his actions. His prior criminal record, his familiarity with the city streets, and the minor traces he inadvertently left at crime scenes became threads connecting the disparate incidents. The journey from Suspects to Dead Ends was not wasted. It had honed the investigators' understanding of the baseline killer's methods, mindset, and vulnerabilities, setting the stage for the breakthroughs that would follow. In the end, Part 6 of this story, The Period of Suspects and Dead Ends, is a testament to both the cunning of the predator and the resilience of the human pursuit of justice. It illustrates the complexity of tracking a criminal who operates in the shadows of ordinary life, the psychological strain of an investigation filled with false leads, and the patience, persistence, and ingenuity required to finally illuminate the darkness cast over Phoenix by the baseline killer. The breakthrough came not as a sudden revelation, but as the accumulation of months of relentless investigation, patient observation, and meticulous analysis. Phoenix had endured months of fear, each neighborhood marked by whispers of attacks, every routine journey punctuated with tension. Detectives had been chasing shadows, false leads, and partial witness accounts, each incident highlighting the cunning, adaptability, and cruelty of the baseline killer. And yet, somewhere within the chaos, patterns began to crystallize. They were subtle, almost invisible at first, small consistencies that only a trained eye could recognize. A particular sequence of streets, the approximate timing of certain attacks, the faint yet consistent forensic traces left behind. The pieces were coming together, one painstakingly verified thread at a time. The turning point arrived when a survivor from one of the earlier attacks came forward with a more detailed description of the assailant. Her memory, sharpened by trauma and revisited countless times in therapy and police interviews, allowed investigators to piece together characteristics that had previously been fragmented. She recalled not only the man's appearance, height, build, facial features, but also his movements, his gestures, and the way he carried himself during the attack. There was a calm, almost casual precision in the way he operated, a confidence that did not scream but quietly dominated every interaction. She remembered the tilt of his head as he scanned the surroundings, the pause before striking, the careful manipulation of her bag and belongings. Every detail, every nuance, became a vital clue in forming a psychological and physical profile. Concurrently, forensic teams revisited the DNA evidence collected from various crime scenes. In the initial phases of the investigation, this evidence had been inconclusive or unmatched in existing databases. But advances in forensic analysis, combined with persistent re-examination, revealed correlations between samples from multiple attacks. Each trace, skin cells on clothing, microscopic blood residue, hair strands, formed a chain that connected seemingly unrelated crimes. Detectives realized that these attacks, scattered across time and space, were indeed the work of a single individual, not a string of coincidental criminals. This revelation was monumental. The realization that one man had orchestrated these attacks, and that his pattern could be discerned, brought a renewed sense of focus and urgency to the investigation. Tip lines, which had previously been flooded with both credible and unreliable information, now produced leads that could be corroborated with physical evidence. One tip placed a man matching the survivor's description near multiple attack sites, moving with apparent knowledge of the neighborhoods and timing that mirrored the crimes. Officers cross-referenced this tip with existing arrest records, narrowing their focus to individuals who fit both the behavioral profile and the geographic footprint of the attacks. Among these names, one stood out as Mark Goudeau, a man with a prior criminal history including violent offenses and theft, who was familiar with the neighborhoods where the incidents occurred. Goudeau's prior record provided not only a plausible connection but also insight into his behavioral tendencies. Investigators reviewed court files, parole records, and previous police reports, noting patterns of opportunistic behavior, calculated risk-taking, and an ability to evade serious consequences for earlier crimes. These documents revealed a man who understood both the mechanics of criminal activity and the importance of minimizing exposure. They painted a portrait of someone who could operate in plain sight, blend into the fabric of the community, and yet remain capable of extreme violence. At the same time, investigators began analyzing the baseline killer's movements in relation to city infrastructure and residential patterns. A geographic profile emerged, mapping attack sites against routes, bus stops, convenience stores, and residential areas. The pattern revealed not just proximity, but timing. Attacks often occurred when the perpetrator could observe the environment without drawing attention, taking advantage of natural blind spots and predictable human behavior. Combining this geographic analysis with forensic and witness data allowed detectives to narrow their focus further, highlighting areas where Goudeau had both opportunity and motive to strike. A crucial piece of the breakthrough involved surveillance footage. Though grainy and often fragmented, these recordings captured fleeting images of a man whose movements and appearance matched witness descriptions. Officers scrutinized every frame, noting gait, posture, hand gestures, and even the way he carried himself. By comparing multiple video segments, detectives began to recognize consistency in behavior, a distinctive stride, a casual but calculated scanning of the environment, and subtle cues that indicated an experienced predator. This visual confirmation, combined with the accumulating forensic and testimonial evidence, solidified the case against Gudo and gave investigators the confidence to move toward apprehension. Investigators also revisited earlier dead ends, re-evaluating witnesses and suspects who had previously seemed unrelated. Cross-referencing statements with newly identified patterns revealed inconsistencies and coincidences that had been overlooked. Minor details, a description of a tattoo, the type of vehicle seen near multiple incidents, even the timing of grocery store visits, formed a network of associations that ultimately pointed toward Gudo. What had once appeared to be disjointed, random attacks now revealed a sinister intelligence operating methodically, exploiting the ordinary rhythms of the city to commit extraordinary violence. The human element of the breakthrough cannot be overstated. Survivors, neighbors, and even casual witnesses provided critical details that, when aggregated, created a composite understanding of the perpetrator. Their courage in recounting traumatic events, often with painstaking detail, allowed detectives to corroborate and refine forensic and geographic data. The collaboration between the community and law enforcement exemplified a rare synergy, where patience, vigilance, and trust combined to transform fear into actionable insight. The psychological dimension of Gudo's capture was equally critical. Behavioral analysts predicted his patterns of evasion and escalation, anticipating where he might strike next or how he would respond to increased scrutiny. They assessed his likely comfort zones, habitual routes, and preferred types of victims, integrating these predictions with observed evidence to narrow potential locations where he might be found. This strategic approach allowed investigators to plan not just a reactive response but a proactive interception, anticipating the perpetrator's movements rather than merely responding to them. Finally, the breakthrough culminated in the recognition of Gudo as the singular architect of the baseline killer's reign of terror. The convergence of witness statements, forensic evidence, surveillance footage, geographic analysis, and behavioral profiling painted a cohesive, undeniable picture. Investigators now possessed both the knowledge and the strategic positioning necessary to move forward with an arrest, understanding not just who Gudo was, but how he had operated, and the extent of his crimes. The city of Phoenix, meanwhile, waited anxiously. Residents had become accustomed to fear, their routines altered by months of uncertainty and terror. Streets, once familiar, were now navigated with heightened vigilance. The announcement that investigators had identified a prime suspect did not immediately ease anxiety, rather, it intensified anticipation. For the community, the breakthrough represented both hope and the reminder that the man responsible for months of violence remained a very real, present threat until physically apprehended. The final steps toward capture involved careful planning, coordination, and a tactical approach that prioritized both officer safety and the prevention of further harm. Investigators prepared to move on Gudo with precision, informed by months of painstaking work. The culmination of this investigative marathon was not a single dramatic moment, but the careful orchestration of multiple elements, timing, location, surveillance, and evidence collection, all converging to bring a dangerous predator out of the shadows and into custody. In retrospect, the breakthrough highlighted the combination of persistence, intelligence, and collaboration required to solve such a complex case. It underscored the necessity of integrating multiple investigative approaches, forensic science, behavioral analysis, witness testimony, and geographic profiling. More importantly, it demonstrated the human capacity to persist in the face of fear, to seek patterns where none seemed to exist, and to transform terror into action. The identification of Mark Gudo was not merely a procedural victory, it was the culmination of a year-long struggle between order and chaos, between a community's resilience and a predator's malice. The courtroom was silent, the air thick with tension, anticipation, and the unspoken weight of countless lives forever altered. Mark Gudo, the man who had terrorized Phoenix for nearly a year, sat at the defendant's table with a composed exterior, but his eyes flickered with subtle movements, betraying the faintest hints of unease. Around him, the reality of the legal system, the walls, the long benches, the heavy oak of the judge's desk, created an atmosphere of inevitability. The community had watched in fear for months, and now, the city bore witness to the formal confrontation between predator and justice. The prosecution's opening statements were deliberate, measured, yet charged with the gravity of Goudeau's crimes. They recounted the months of terror the victims left scarred or dead, and the persistent fear that had gripped entire neighborhoods. Their words painted a vivid picture: ordinary streets transformed into stages for violence, everyday routines shattered by the unpredictable and brutal assaults. Each story was selected to convey not just the facts, but the human cost, highlighting the enduring trauma and the psychological scars carried by survivors and families alike. Jurors leaned forward, absorbing the gravity of the situation, confronted with evidence of a calculated predator who had exploited ordinary life for his own destructive ends. Survivors were called to the stand, their testimonies a mixture of courage, vulnerability, and raw emotion. They recounted encounters with Goudou in painstaking detail, describing his approach, his gestures, and the chilling calm with which he executed each attack. One woman spoke of the cold precision in his eyes, the way he observed her before striking, and the fear that gripped her as she realized that her life hung in the balance. Another survivor described the violent chaos of an attack at a bus stop, the way he forced compliance, and the lingering terror that followed even after she escaped. Each testimony reinforced the prosecution's narrative that Goudou was not only capable of murder and assault but had cultivated fear as a weapon, systematically dismantling a community's sense of safety. Forensic evidence played a critical role in the courtroom, bridging the gap between anecdotal witness accounts and tangible proof of Goudou's guilt. DNA collected from multiple crime scenes was presented in meticulous detail, each sample connected to specific attacks with an almost irrefutable clarity. Investigators testified about the painstaking process of matching evidence across locations, highlighting the meticulous care taken to ensure accuracy. Photographs, diagrams, and timelines were introduced, illustrating the sequence and nature of the attacks. While the details were harrowing, they provided the jurors with a clear, structured understanding of the crimes, grounding the emotional weight of survivor accounts in scientific verification. The defense attempted to challenge these assertions, focusing on technicalities and inconsistencies in witness memory. They questioned timelines, examined forensic methodologies, and highlighted gaps or ambiguities in observational testimony. Yet the prosecution had anticipated these tactics. Through careful cross-examination and corroboration of evidence, they dismantled attempts to cast doubt, reinforcing the narrative that Goudou had operated with both foresight and adaptability. The courtroom became a battleground of logic and emotion, with jurors navigating the complexity of evidence while absorbing the gravity of the human impact. One of the most striking elements of the trial was the contrast between Goudou's composed exterior and the vivid accounts of his violence. While he sat quietly, occasionally adjusting his posture or glancing at counsel, the jurors were confronted with images and descriptions that conveyed the terror he had inflicted. They saw photographs of crime scenes, diagrams showing movements during attacks, and testimony detailing the psychological manipulation he employed. The dissonance between his calm demeanor and the chaos of his crimes created a palpable tension, a reminder of the duality inherent in predatory behavior, the ordinary exterior masking extraordinary danger. Throughout the trial, the emotional toll on victims and families was undeniable. Families of those killed attended sessions in silence, some wiping tears, others holding photographs of loved ones who would never return. Survivors often spoke through trembling voices, recounting experiences that left them physically and emotionally scarred. The courtroom absorbed this tension, every word, gesture, and photograph amplifying the stakes. For many in attendance, the trial was not just about legal resolution but about witnessing acknowledgement, validation, and justice for the suffering endured. Expert witnesses further strengthened the prosecution's case. Psychologists and behavioral analysts detailed the patterns of escalation and methodical behavior consistent with serial offenders. They explained how Goudou's combination of planning, opportunism, and adaptability made him both difficult to apprehend and exceptionally dangerous. They described the profound impact on community psychology, emphasizing that the baseline killer had created a climate of fear that extended far beyond individual victims. These experts provided context, helping jurors understand not just the actions, but the mindset and consequences of the perpetrator's behavior. The defense attempted to humanize Goudou, presenting him as a man with a troubled past and prior criminal history that might have contributed to his behavior. They emphasized mitigating factors, including socioeconomic background, personal challenges, and the possibility of impulse rather than premeditation. However, these arguments were largely overshadowed by the overwhelming evidence of deliberate, repeated, and calculated acts of violence. The courtroom, while attentive to the nuances of human behavior, was confronted repeatedly with the consequences of Goudeau's choices and the stark reality that these choices had left lasting scars on a city. The climax of the trial arrived with closing statements, where the prosecution synthesized months of testimony, forensic analysis, and psychological insight into a narrative of accountability and justice. They reminded jurors of the victims' lives, the persistent fear that had gripped Phoenix, and the pattern of calculated brutality that Goudreau had established. The narrative was both factual and emotional, grounding the jury in the human impact while reinforcing the logical case for guilt. The defense, while attempting to contextualize behavior and argue for leniency, could not overcome the breadth and consistency of evidence presented. Deliberation was tense and methodical. Jurors revisited testimony, examined exhibits, and weighed the credibility of each witness. The weight of responsibility was palpable. They were tasked not only with determining guilt, but with deciding the consequences of unprecedented violence. Outside the courthouse, the city watched and waited, a community eager for closure yet aware that the process was as emotionally complex as the crimes themselves. News outlets reported every development, yet nothing could fully capture the tension, fear, and anticipation contained within the courtroom walls. Ultimately, the verdict was delivered, guilty on all counts. The jury, having carefully considered the evidence, found Goudreau responsible for multiple murders, sexual assaults, and acts of violent robbery. The room was silent as the foreperson announced the decision, the gravity of the moment resonating through every observer. Families of victims wept openly, some with relief, some with lingering grief. Survivors felt a complex mixture of validation, vindication, and residual trauma. The courtroom, once a theater of anticipation and dread, became a site of partial resolution. The legal system had recognized the magnitude of Goudreau's crimes and formally held him accountable. Sentencing followed with equal intensity. The prosecution presented detailed arguments for the maximum penalty, emphasizing the calculated, repeated, and lethal nature of the attacks, the terror inflicted on a community, and the need to prevent future harm. Defense counsel made a final appeal, urging consideration of mitigating factors, yet the cumulative evidence, survivor testimonies, and expert analysis left little room for leniency. The judge, solemn and deliberate, pronounced the sentence, death. The declaration reverberated through the courtroom, carrying a weight that transcended the legal declaration itself. It was a symbolic closure for a city gripped by terror, a formal acknowledgement of the scale and severity of Goudreau's crimes. As the courtroom emptied, the emotional residue lingered. For survivors and families, the verdict was both relief and reminder, the acknowledgement of wrongdoing, yet also the recognition of permanent loss. For law enforcement, it marked the culmination of a painstaking investigation, the validation of relentless effort, and the resolution of a case that had consumed months of attention and resources. For the city of Phoenix, the baseline killer's capture and sentencing represented both closure and the enduring awareness that ordinary life could be disrupted in profound and violent ways. The trial of Marc Goudreau stands as a vivid testament to the intersection of human resilience, procedural diligence, and the extraordinary capacity for evil to hide within the ordinary. The courtroom, with its blend of law, testimony, and human emotion, became the final arena where the predator's reign of terror was confronted, scrutinized, and condemned. Through months of painstaking work, Phoenix had witnessed justice meted out, survivors' voices honored, and the city's collective nightmare brought to a formal end, even as the emotional and psychological scars would persist for years to come. The city of Phoenix exhaled a collective breath it hadn't realized it had been holding. Months of terror, uncertainty, and hypervigilance had left an indelible mark on the landscape, both physical and psychological. Streets once familiar now carried echoes of fear, and ordinary routines, walking to a bus stop, jogging through a neighborhood, even opening one's front door at night, had been transformed by the memory of the baseline killer's indiscriminate violence. In the aftermath of Marc Goudreau's arrest and sentencing, a city that had lived in suspense began the painstaking process of confronting the trauma inflicted by a man who had turned ordinary life into a theater of terror. For survivors, the period following the trial was fraught with a complex blend of relief, lingering fear, and the struggle to reclaim agency over their own lives. Many found themselves wrestling with nightmares, hypervigilance, and the persistent sense that danger could re-emerge at any moment. Daily tasks required conscious mental effort, walking to the mailbox, entering a grocery store, or even stepping into a car triggered flashbacks of moments when violence had erupted without warning. Therapy became a lifeline for many, a structured environment in which they could process trauma, reclaim control over their emotions, and begin the arduous journey toward healing. Families of victims who had been killed endured an equally complex aftermath. While the trial and sentencing offered a formal acknowledgement of the crimes committed and a sense of justice served, the emotional vacuum left by lost loved ones could not be filled by legal outcomes alone. Anniversaries of attacks, visits to crime scenes, and simple reminders of the individuals who had been taken became focal points for grief and reflection. Many engaged in community support networks, advocacy, and remembrance activities, transforming personal loss into collective action aimed at prevention, awareness, and commemoration. The psychological impact extended beyond survivors and families to the broader Phoenix community. For months, the baseline killer had imposed a climate of fear that infiltrated daily life, altering behavior and eroding the sense of security that residents had once taken for granted. Even after the arrest and conviction, traces of that fear lingered. Parents spoke in hushed tones about safety, neighbors watched streets and vehicles with heightened attention, and ordinary public spaces, parks, bus stops, convenience stores, retained an undercurrent of unease. The shadow of the attacks persisted, a reminder that the randomness of violence could disrupt ordinary life in profound and lasting ways. Law enforcement agencies faced their own aftermath. The baseline killer case had been one of the most complex and resource-intensive investigations in recent memory, involving months of canvassing neighborhoods, analyzing forensic evidence, tracking tips, and collaborating with behavioral analysts. Officers who had worked tirelessly on the case carried both professional pride and personal strain. Some experienced secondary trauma, haunted by crime scenes, victim testimony, and the intricate details of the attacks. Departments implemented debriefing sessions, counseling, and support networks to help officers process the emotional toll of investigating such violent, unpredictable crimes. The lessons learned from the investigation also prompted operational changes, including the expansion of surveillance measures, improved community engagement strategies, and refined procedures for responding to serial offenses. Community response to the aftermath was multifaceted. Local organizations, neighborhood watches, and city authorities collaborated to restore a sense of safety and cohesion. Increased street lighting, enhanced patrols, and neighborhood alert systems were implemented to prevent future crimes and reassure residents. Public meetings addressed both immediate concerns and long-term strategies for community security, emphasizing collective vigilance, communication, and resilience. Phoenix residents, while still wary, began to slowly reclaim public spaces, gradually re-establishing routines and trust in communal safety. The media played a critical role in shaping public perception of the aftermath. Coverage of the trial, arrest, and sentencing had been extensive, with updates on court proceedings, forensic breakthroughs, and survivor testimonies capturing widespread attention. After the conviction, reporting shifted to the ongoing impact on victims, families, and the city. Features explored personal narratives, highlighting resilience, coping strategies, and community solidarity. While media attention could sometimes exacerbate anxiety or sensationalize trauma, responsible reporting also provided a channel for public awareness, advocacy, and education about personal safety and crime prevention. Education and awareness initiatives emerged as another critical aspect of the aftermath. Schools, community centers, and public institutions began offering programs on personal safety, situational awareness, and support resources for those affected by trauma or crime. Workshops for teenagers and young adults addressed risk assessment, stranger danger, and practical strategies for navigating urban environments safely. These initiatives, while reactive, represented an investment in long-term resilience and prevention, ensuring that the lessons of the baseline killer case would inform behavior and awareness for years to come. The baseline killer case also catalyzed improvements in forensic and investigative methodologies. The integration of DNA analysis, geographic profiling, and behavioral assessment during the investigation had demonstrated the value of multidisciplinary approaches to complex crime. Agencies reviewed protocols, invested in training, and explored technological advancements to enhance both the speed and accuracy of future investigations. The emphasis on collaboration between departments, expert consultants, and community members became a model for tackling similar cases, emphasizing that effective policing requires both science and human intelligence. Psychologically, the aftermath illustrated the enduring impact of random violence. Whereas most crimes have a clear motive, victims, or perpetrators with identifiable relationships, Goudeau's attacks were indiscriminate, opportunistic, and unpredictable. This randomness amplified anxiety and altered perception of everyday risk. Studies and reports following the case highlighted increased vigilance, heightened stress responses, and changes in urban mobility patterns among residents. The baseline killer's legacy, in part, was a city more conscious of vulnerability and the fragility of ordinary safety, and an awareness that violence could emerge in unexpected ways from seemingly ordinary individuals. Community resilience became a central theme in the post-conviction period. Neighborhood coalitions organized safety initiatives, community watch programs, and public awareness campaigns. Local government invested in improving urban infrastructure, lighting, and emergency response coordination. Survivors, families, and advocacy groups worked to ensure that the lessons learned from Goudeau's reign of terror translated into proactive measures for prevention and education. This collective effort reflected a city determined not to be defined solely by fear but by its capacity to recover, adapt, and protect its residents. Yet the emotional and psychological aftermath was not uniform. Individuals processed trauma in diverse ways, and recovery was neither linear nor guaranteed. Some survivors channeled their experiences into advocacy, education, or creative expression, transforming personal trauma into societal benefit. Others struggled with anxiety, depression, or post-traumatic stress, requiring long-term therapeutic support. Families of deceased victims navigated grief in private and public spheres, sometimes finding solace in memorials, foundations, or public acknowledgement of their loss. Across the city, the baseline killer case became a shared, though deeply personal, point of reference for understanding vulnerability, resilience, and the limits of control in urban life. The legal aftermath also influenced public policy and law enforcement practices. The recognition of the challenges in apprehending a mobile, adaptable, and unpredictable predator prompted discussions about resource allocation, interdepartmental coordination, and the role of community engagement in preventing future crimes. Phoenix law enforcement implemented strategic initiatives to strengthen rapid response, forensic capacity, and data integration, ensuring that lessons from the baseline killer case would inform the handling of both individual crimes and complex serial offenses. Mark Goudeau himself became a figure of intense scrutiny even after conviction. Media profiles, psychological analyses, and public discussions examined the motivations, methods, and background of the baseline killer. Analysts explored the interplay of opportunity, psychology, and prior criminal behavior, seeking to understand not only what he had done, but why he had acted with such calculated randomness. Goudeau's case became a reference point in criminology studies, law enforcement training, and public awareness, illustrating the complex dynamics of serial predation in urban environments. For the city of Phoenix, the aftermath of the baseline killer was both cautionary and transformative. Residents carried forward a heightened awareness of personal safety, a deeper appreciation for community vigilance, and a recognition of the resilience required to navigate life after trauma. Urban planning, law enforcement practices, and social support systems were all influenced by the lessons learned during the months of terror. Survivors, families, and law enforcement forged new collaborations, ensuring that the experiences of the past would inform strategies for safety, prevention, and recovery in the future. In reflecting on the aftermath, it becomes clear that the baseline killer's impact extended far beyond the immediate victims. The psychological, social, and infrastructural consequences reverberated through neighborhoods, institutions, and individual lives. Fear, grief, and trauma were met with resilience, advocacy, and adaptation, creating a complex legacy of both devastation and recovery. The arrest and sentencing of Mark Goudeau marked the end of his physical threat, but the echoes of his violence remained, challenging the city to rebuild, remember, and remain vigilant against the unpredictable nature of human malice. Ultimately, the aftermath of the Baseline Killer case is a testament to the enduring interplay between human vulnerability and resilience. Phoenix experienced the depths of terror, the painstaking pursuit of justice, and the painstaking work of psychological and social recovery. The city's response, through survivors' courage, families' advocacy, law enforcement diligence, and communal solidarity, illustrates a profound truth: even in the face of random and calculated violence, human determination, empathy, and cooperation can forge paths toward healing, understanding, and ultimately, the reclamation of safety and dignity. The story of the Baseline Killer did not end with Mark Goudeau's arrest or even his sentencing. Its legacy continued to ripple through Phoenix, echoing in neighborhoods, law enforcement offices, courtrooms, and the very consciousness of the city. The crimes had left scars, both visible and invisible, marking the urban landscape and the psyches of its inhabitants. Yet within the aftermath, a series of lessons emerged, shaping how a city, its people, and its institutions approached safety, vigilance, and the understanding of human violence. One of the most immediate legacies was the heightened awareness of personal and communal vulnerability. Residents who had once navigated the city with casual confidence were now acutely aware that violence could strike without warning and without apparent motive. This awareness did not manifest as paranoia alone, but as a cautious mindfulness embedded in daily life. Parents taught children to be aware of their surroundings, to trust instincts, and to report unusual behavior. Neighborhood watch groups expanded, incorporating sophisticated communication methods, patrol schedules, and partnerships with local law enforcement. Simple acts, locking doors, monitoring street activity, and walking in groups, took on a renewed significance, symbolizing a reclaiming of agency over spaces that had been violated by fear. The law enforcement community, too, absorbed deep and lasting lessons from the Baseline Killer case. The complexity of Goudeau's crimes, a mix of randomness, opportunism, and adaptability, highlighted the need for multidisciplinary approaches to criminal investigations. Traditional methods, while necessary, were insufficient on their own. Investigators relied on a combination of forensic science, behavioral analysis, geographic profiling, and meticulous attention to witness accounts to bring the case to resolution. This realization prompted departments across Phoenix to re-evaluate investigative protocols, invest in training, and strengthen collaboration between specialized units. The case became a benchmark for understanding how serial offenders could operate within urban environments, eluding detection while leaving subtle clues that, when properly synthesized, could reveal the perpetrator's identity. For forensic science, the Baseline Killer investigation underscored the transformative power of DNA analysis and its integration with other investigative methods. Prior to the arrest, DNA samples collected at multiple crime scenes had initially yielded limited results. It was only through persistent analysis, combined with improvements in technology, that the connections between Goudeau's crimes became clear. The case validated investments in laboratory capacity, procedural rigor, and cross-referencing databases to uncover patterns across multiple incidents. Subsequent training programs emphasized the importance of maintaining meticulous chain of custody procedures, documenting minor forensic traces, and ensuring that investigators were well-versed in interpreting the scientific nuances of evidence. Behavioral analysis emerged as another critical legacy. Goudeau's crimes exhibited both calculated planning and opportunistic spontaneity, demonstrating a hybrid profile that challenged traditional categorizations of serial offenders. Psychologists and criminal profilers studied his behaviors, movements, and patterns to refine predictive models and better understand the psychology of random, predatory violence. Their findings informed law enforcement training, emphasizing the importance of anticipating behavior, understanding environmental interactions, and recognizing the subtle cues that might indicate predatory intent. By integrating behavioral insights into policing, officers were better equipped to respond proactively rather than reactively, increasing both the speed and effectiveness of interventions. The Baseline Killer case also left an imprint on public policy and urban planning. Recognizing that physical environments could both facilitate and hinder crime, city officials implemented changes aimed at reducing vulnerability. Improved street lighting, enhanced surveillance systems, and increased foot patrols became standard in neighborhoods previously affected by the attacks. Urban planners and law enforcement collaborated to design spaces that prioritized visibility, minimized hidden areas, and incorporated community input to foster both safety and trust. These changes were not merely reactive, they represented a proactive approach to crime prevention, integrating lessons from past violence into the fabric of city life. Community resilience, in particular, became a hallmark of the legacy. In response to the fear and trauma induced by Goudeau's crimes, neighborhoods developed networks of support that extended beyond the immediate threats of violence. Support groups, counseling services, and public awareness campaigns provided outlets for survivors and families to process trauma and share experiences. Community-led initiatives emphasized empowerment, education, and collective responsibility, transforming fear into action. Residents who had been paralyzed by terror began to reclaim public spaces, organize safety workshops, and participate in programs designed to foster social cohesion. The shared experience of surviving and responding to the baseline killer forged bonds between community members that endured long after the trial concluded. Another critical aspect of the case's legacy was the role of media in shaping public perception and awareness. Coverage of the attacks, the investigation, and the trial had been extensive, sometimes sensational, yet ultimately informative. Responsible reporting played a pivotal role in educating the public about crime prevention, survivor resources, and the investigative process. Media outlets documented both the horrors of the attacks and the triumph of justice, highlighting survivor narratives, forensic breakthroughs, and community initiatives. Over time, this coverage contributed to a more informed and vigilant public, capable of engaging with safety measures while understanding the complexities of criminal behavior. The baseline killer case also left lasting lessons for the criminal justice system itself. The integration of multiple investigative disciplines, the careful documentation of evidence, and the rigorous adherence to procedural integrity ensured that the legal process could proceed effectively, even in the face of complex and emotionally charged circumstances. Prosecutors, judges, and defense counsel alike were reminded of the delicate balance between procedural fairness and the moral imperative to deliver justice for victims and communities. The trial became a reference point for handling cases involving multiple offenses, random violence, and extensive community impact, demonstrating the importance of coordination, preparation, and ethical rigor. Psychologically, the case underscored the enduring consequences of trauma and the need for long-term support. Survivors of Goudeau's attacks often required extended therapy, coping strategies, and structured interventions to address anxiety, hypervigilance, and post-traumatic stress. Families of deceased victims experienced a grief that was compounded by public attention and the magnitude of the crimes. Recognizing these needs, Phoenix invested in expanding mental health services, integrating trauma-informed care into public programs, and ensuring that resources were available not only immediately after the events but for years afterward. The city acknowledged that justice was not solely delivered through the courtroom but through ongoing support and recognition of human suffering. Culturally, the baseline killer case became part of Phoenix's collective memory, a reference point for understanding the intersection of violence, randomness, and urban life. It sparked conversations about the unpredictability of crime, the role of individual choice in perpetuating harm, and the societal responsibility to respond to threats proactively. Educational programs, community workshops, and media retrospectives examined the case as a cautionary tale, emphasizing awareness, preparation, and empathy for victims. The narrative of the baseline killer extended beyond the specific acts of violence, encompassing broader themes of resilience, accountability, and the human capacity to recover and adapt in the face of extreme adversity. The case also influenced law enforcement collaboration at a regional and national level. Lessons learned from the investigation, particularly the integration of forensic, behavioral, and geographic profiling techniques, were shared with other departments, shaping approaches to serial offenses in different cities. The case underscored the value of interagency cooperation, data sharing, and proactive intelligence gathering, demonstrating that effective crime prevention and resolution often require a multi-jurisdictional perspective. This dissemination of knowledge ensured that the baseline killer's crimes would contribute to broader strategies for public safety, extending the impact of Phoenix's experience well beyond local boundaries. Ultimately, the legacy of the baseline killer case is one of duality. It highlights the profound capacity for human cruelty and the randomness of violence, yet it also illuminates the strength, resilience, and resourcefulness of communities and institutions. The crimes inflicted lasting harm, yet they also catalyzed improvements in safety, law enforcement practices, mental health awareness, and civic engagement. The story of Mark Goudeau serves as both a cautionary tale and a testament to the human capacity to respond, adapt, and rebuild. As years passed, the narrative of the baseline killer became intertwined with the identity of Phoenix itself. Residents spoke of the events with a mixture of reverence for the survivors, grief for the lost, and recognition of the lessons hard-learned. Streets, neighborhoods, and public spaces retained subtle markers of the city's journey through fear and recovery. Community initiatives, policy changes, and cultural reflections ensured that the memory of the baseline killer would inform future generations, not merely as a story of violence, but as a complex lesson in vigilance, empathy, and resilience. In reflecting upon this legacy, one sees a pattern emerge: violence, no matter how calculated or random, leaves both visible and invisible marks. Yet human response, the combination of courage, intelligence, and community solidarity, creates a parallel and enduring impact, capable of shaping society, informing policy, and preserving the memory of those affected. The baseline killer case, in this sense, transcends its temporal confines. It is not only a record of crimes and legal resolution but a lasting framework through which society can understand danger, recovery, and the intricate balance between fear and resilience.